So, yeah.
All right, there you go.
We'll do our break right
Awesome.
after that.
Thank you.
And then after she's done, I'll give you more information as to which room for the breakouts, which room is which, and then we'll go from there. I'll get started.
Thank you. I'm Mari Reynolds, and I'm from Ask Resource Center, and we are a resource center for families of children with disabilities. So we're statewide, and we get funding from lots of different places. We're a nonprofit agency, and so all of our staff and board members are family members of children with disabilities. And so it's really all about that family connection, and so anytime you would call Ask with a question or a concern, you'd be able to talk to somebody who maybe has gone through some things similar to what you have. And so we have a number of different projects at Ask. We're part of a national network of parent centers. So there's a parent center that's required by federal law in every state. So if you happen to move to another state, you might consider contacting the parent center in that state just to understand how their system might work different than how our system works in Iowa, just with eligibility for different things, or navigating services and finding services. So there is a parent center that's required in every state, and so we're Iowa's Parent Training and Information Center, and we've held that grant since 1998. And so it's some funding that we get from the Office of Special Education Programs, the federal U.S. Department of Education. That's one of our main projects, and that's the project that I'll be speaking to you under today. As I said, we have other projects as well. So some of our other projects, guess not. Some of our other projects include some health information center projects. So again, just helping families navigate services. We also have some projects around transition planning, so preparing for life after high school for kids with disabilities. And there's a project called FIND, Families of Iowa Network for Disabilities. So just connecting, it's kind of like Facebook, but for families of children with disabilities in Iowa. It's free for families, and anybody can get on there. And you can search for folks in your area or with a certain type of disability or anything like that. We also have events and just different information on that site. One of our other big projects is around dispute resolution training. So all of our staff are trained in mediation, trying to help resolve conflicts at the lowest level possible. And so we also offer some of those trainings to families and educators as well around the IEP process. And so if anybody's interested in that, there's actually stipends that are available that can allow families to travel and maybe to pay for your childcare or something like that if you were to attend one of those trainings. And so I was going to go back to this real quick and just mention that we do a lot of newsletters and trainings. A lot of what I do is trainings with families, but I also have most of my job is just taking calls. So if you have a question or a concern or an issue, you could call us, and it might take a day or two before somebody's able to get back to you, but we'll give you a call back and maybe just help you to know, what does the law say about this issue, and maybe what some options could be. We ask, what have you tried, and help brainstorm about some other possibilities. And so that's one of our main roles, I guess. We also have newsletters, and our website has a lot of really great information as well. So we've got some sample letters related to IEPs and 504s and things like that, behavior plans, and what else? And I can come and do trainings for pretty much any group. I go across the state all the time doing trainings for support type groups and things like that. So if anybody's interested in a training in your area or with your individual support group, we'd be happy to come and work with you. We ask for hopefully maybe about 10 or so people to be there before we'll come, or travel too far. And so then I also sometimes will go to meetings with families, IEP meetings or 504s, or just trying to help facilitate the process a little bit. So today we're going to be talking about IEPs and 504s and transition planning, and I don't have a whole lot of time to do that, so wish me luck. So I'm really going to be touching on a lot of these things, and I have a booth over in the room next door, so feel free to drop by and ask me any questions that you might have. And so I probably won't have a whole lot of time for questions in this session, but I'd be happy to talk individually with anybody about their questions and concerns. So all kids in public schools are covered right now under what's No Child Left Behind is what it's called, but that law will soon be changing over to what's called the Every Student Succeeds Act, the ESSA. And so it's much like No Child Left Behind, but it's more state run. There's more control from the states in that process. I'm not here to talk to you about that law, but that's a whole other thing. So the next bubble that I have here represents kids that qualify for accommodations under Section 504. So that would be kids with disabilities that have one or more major life functions that are impaired by their disability. We'll talk more about those definitions. And then an even smaller bubble, or a smaller group of kids that would qualify for services under IDEA, or Special Education Services, which is an IEP. And so this kind of shows you that more kids would probably qualify for a 504 plan than an IEP, but not every kid with a disability necessarily qualifies for services or plans. But there is some things that are typically done under No Child Left Behind, or what will soon be the ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act, that can also be helpful. So I'm going to talk about some of those school supports that are available. And so right now these are things that are available just under that broad spectrum, not a 504 or an IEP, but might be available for any kid really. So the process that we use in Iowa is kind of a problem-solving approach. If your child is not meeting the benchmarks or the statewide standards, then they may end up referring your child over for a problem-solving approach. It's kind of an intervention process. And so the school, there's actually no requirement for the school to involve parents in that process, unfortunately. And so, the school may be pulling your child out for some extra reading instruction or maybe some extra math instruction, but they don't necessarily have to inform you of that at this point. And so, it's good to ask questions. If you have concerns about any of those kinds of things, to just ask, are there any interventions that might be available or that my child is already receiving? Because they may be, and we just maybe didn't know that. So the way it kind of works is that all kids get that universal instruction from the regular gen ed teacher, and then a smaller group of kids might get pulled out for that supplemental extra little small group reading instruction or whatever the area is. And then an even smaller group of kids is going to be pulled for an intensive level intervention, and there should be some data collected with that. It's usually a pretty regular every day, maybe a 30-minute a day sort of intervention. And so there should be some data being kept on the progress that the student is making. And so families should feel free to ask about that data. What is the data being kept on? Can I get regular notifications of that data and things like that? That's just that intervention process. And there is no requirement that they do these kinds of things. This is just the system that we use. And so anytime a child isn't meeting that proficient level, which proficient is 41st percent on those standardized assessments. So that's pretty low, really. So anybody that's below that 41st percentile might get pulled out for some of these extra interventions or supplemental instruction. Some other things that might be helpful is positive behavior supports. It's not something that schools are required to do, but a lot of schools have chosen to do positive behavior interventions and supports. It's just the idea of helping reinforce that appropriate behavior rather than punishing for negative behavior. And so it's usually a school-wide system like those character counts kinds of things. We're going to have posters up around the school about the expectations for what kids should be doing, what kind of behavior we want to see. And so again, it's just that reinforcement of that appropriate behavior. And a lot of kids really respond pretty well to those things. We can even sometimes individualize that plan a little bit for a particular student, but it's something that if your school doesn't have, you might ask about that, because a lot of kids do benefit from those school-wide positive behavior supports. And then anytime you have a child that does have a behavior issue at school, we should always be focusing on those positive reinforcements. Just trying to, again, focus on the positive piece, and rather than punishing for the negative behaviors. And there might be a piece of that too, but helping to reinforce the appropriate. So now I'm going to get into the 504 piece. Does anybody here have a child with a 504 plan? Really? Oh, I'm surprised.
What is a 504?
A 504 plan, well, we'll talk about that. So a 504 plan is a non-discriminatory policy. It's part of the federal law. So what it says is that the school can't discriminate against your child because they have a disability. So it says that no otherwise qualified person with a disability in the United States shall, because of their disability, be discriminated against in any public programs. And so this doesn't just apply to schools, this applies to any agency that receives federal funding. So if you have a child with a disability, any agency that receives that federal funding should make their programs accessible to that child, or to that person. It doesn't have to be a child. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, that's where this law comes from, or the Rehabilitation Act. And so public parks, libraries, most colleges, even private schools most of the time, a lot of daycares, those are all places where we can get accommodations and should be free from discrimination, and especially if there's federal funding. So this is just the quote from the law that talks about not being discriminated against. And so there are some guidelines for that. And it's a little bit different in the college setting than in the public school setting versus a public building type setting. So the code section varies depending on the setting. But in the schools, and so it's a civil rights law. It's about not being discriminated against. And so pretty much your child with a disability should be able to access the same thing as every other kid at school. They should be able to participate in those extracurricular activities, or they should be able to access their educational program the same as everybody else. And if they need some accommodations in order to do that, then that should be available to them. So this has been around since 1973, came from the Rehab Act. And so it's much broader than just school. It's about public access. And so any federal program should be providing access to their services. And so again, if we need accommodations in order to do that, then those should be provided. So there are some qualifications for the school setting. And so what is an accommodation? It's being able to access something in a different way. So it doesn't change the expectation, but it changes the route maybe in which you get there. And there's a lot of different things that can be done as accommodations. So it's hard to give a list of those kinds of things. I mean, I think that it's almost, why not? You give me an example, and I don't know why it couldn't be. So again, the eligibility is that you have to have a disability, and I guess what I should say is each school has their own procedures to determine these things. These things still apply. This is the federal law, but the schools all have a process that they use to determine these things. And so I can't tell you exactly how it goes in your school district, but that there should be something that explains the process to you. What the federal law says is that the person has to have some kind of a disability, and that disability must impact one or substantially limit, which again, there's a lot of interpretation in these laws, one or more major life activities. And so we'll talk more about that. And then because of those things, you need accommodations. So even if you have a disability that substantially limits one or more major life activities, if you don't really need an accommodation at school, then you're not going to get a plan. It's about the need as well. And so a disability could be defined as anything, pretty much. There is no diagnosis that's not on the list necessarily. This is not an exhaustive list. And actually, even temporary conditions, anything that lasts more than 6 months, could be defined as a disability under Section 504. So, it's not, for kids with ADHD or for kids with health issues necessarily for 504 plans. It's really for whoever needs it. And the definition of substantially limits and major life activities. Again, there isn't any that is an exhaustive list. These are just examples. And so substantially limits is really, anything that takes somebody substantially longer than it would a typical student. And so again, that's very open to interpretation, and I think this is where things can be a little sticky sometimes. And major life activities, again, a lot of different things could be argued here, I think, but again, this is not an exhaustive list. So walking, seeing, breathing, talking, digesting, anything really that could be a major life activity, or tons of things anyway, learning, reading, so I've never really seen a lot of pushback on this piece of it. And so one of the great pieces about 504 and the IEP law as well is that it gives people access to the same thing as everybody else, which includes extracurricular activities. And so if your child needs some accommodations or some supports in place, in order to access that activity, they should be able to get that. And so, and the downside of 504 is that it's a condition of receiving your funding, and so the school doesn't get any extra funding to provide these kinds of things. If your child needs, whatever it is as an accommodation, that's just what the school has to do, and so there isn't anything extra that they get for that. So it can be a little bit it can be a little bit of an extra thing that they have to do, but that shouldn't matter. It should, that's part of the conditions of getting their federal funding, is to make those kinds of accommodations. And so when it comes to a 504 plan, the process is not highly regulated, I guess, is the way I would say it. There's nobody at the Department of Education who is getting a copy of every single 504 plan that's ever written with schools. And so, there's not a whole lot of oversight of these kinds of things. And so it's really important that parents kind of advocate in the process and make sure that the plan is happening the way it's supposed to be and things like that. And so plans should be as specific as they can be to ensure that everybody's on the same page, that we really understand what we're talking about, and that we're getting those accommodations. And so, what is it? How will it be provided? When will it happen? Who's going to provide it? And so even, the difference of the word may versus shall, a lot of plans say, X may, the child may have, access to, whatever it is, some type of support. And that can be a difficult thing because sometimes the school will say, well, we need the child to ask for that. But, so may versus shall, you know, if it says shall, then they really need to do it. But if it's may, then, well, maybe they can do it, you know. So I know that's a fine tooth comb there, but those little things make a difference sometimes. So to be as specific as possible about the what's in that 504 plan and what that accommodation needs to look like.
Is a 504 plan just for accommodations versus an IEP plan?
Yes. So that's really the big difference, and I'll talk about that a little bit more, but with an IEP, it comes with a little bit extra instruction and things like that, where an IEP or a 504 is just accommodations. So, yep. Okay. Oh. And so there should be a 504 coordinator and again, a manual for the school that describes this process. And so I don't have a whole lot more time. Good thing I'm moving on to the IEP section. So again, the smaller bubble is Special Education Services. IDEA is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Special Education Services is what that is. And so that's where our funding comes from for my center. The IDEA has been around since 1974, so it was right after the Rehab Act. And again, it's a federal law, so every state has this same law. And birth through 21. So if you have a child that received early access services, this is the law that provided that support, early access services. And so if you're looking for information about this special education law, it's IDEA. Part B is the school age piece. The first part of IEPs is the evaluation process. And so I know you can't probably see it very well, but up here in the corner is all the different areas that they can evaluate a student for an IEP. Academic, behavior, communication, hearing and vision, adaptive behavior, health, and physical. And so if a parent requests an evaluation, then they need to have a meeting to determine whether or not they need to move forward with that evaluation. And if they decide not to, they should give you something in writing that explains why not. So that's really important. It's something that doesn't happen that way a lot. You know, a lot of families will ask for an evaluation and don't feel like they've been responded to in the appropriate way. So they should be giving you something in writing if they're denying your request for the IEP evaluation. And then they have 60 calendar days to complete that evaluation. And that's usually when somebody from the AEA will come in and complete that evaluation. So if you have a child, if you've been working with somebody from AEA in Iowa, that's the process that we use to get an IEP in place for a child. And so here's the IEP form. It's the same form across the whole state of Iowa. And so if you moved from one part of the state to another, that form should go with you. That plan should go right with you from wherever your child was going to school to that next school. And the next school should implement that IEP just the same as the last one until they're able to have an IEP meeting and change it otherwise then. And so, you know, I can go into all kinds of things. I'm going to skip this part here. The thing is after the child is evaluated and we put the IEP together, we'll provide those services and then we need to measure how is that working or not. The big difference, as you mentioned, is that the IEP provides extra instruction. So if you have a child who is falling below grade level with their skills, and whether that's reading, writing, math, or any of the academic areas, but also things like behavior. You know, if their behavior is not at the level that's what's expected of their age or grade level, or if their social skills, their communication skills, their even adaptive behavior skills, so things like organizational skills even. If we're not at grade level with those things, then we could be evaluated. So once that plan is put into place, then the goals should be monitored. Is the child making the kind of progress that we want with that extra instruction? And it should be reviewed at least annually, at least once a year, and reevaluated every 3 years. And so when we're writing an IEP, it's really about what those services are first. We should design that plan first, and then finally decide where those services are going to be met. Because, you know, it's just the idea that special education is not the room at the end of the hallway like it used to be. Special education services happen in the regular classroom all the time. And so it doesn't have to be, you know, going to the end of the hallway anymore. It can be right there in the regular classroom and really not look a whole lot different than what everybody else is getting, or nobody else would necessarily have to know. So just the idea of least restrictive environment. And there's a lot of things in law that are protections for students and families in this process. This is a goal page of an IEP. And so I've just highlighted a few things here. Right here in the middle of the page is where the goal is written. And then down here towards the bottom, you kind of get lost before you get that far, is how they're going to measure the goal to see whether or not the progress is being made like it should be. So, you know, that's really important, that progress monitoring piece. Then this page here is the services pages. So if there are any accommodations that were on a 504 could go right on to an IEP if the kid ended up qualifying for an IEP instead. But if this was maybe speech therapy, maybe OT or physical therapy services, those kinds of things would be documented on this IEP services page. So how many minutes is that service going to be provided? What setting is that going to be provided in? Who's going to provide it? And things like that. So at the end of at the top of that document, it would then summarize the percentage of the day that the child spends in the gen ed classroom versus in the special ed classroom or any other setting. And so again, this idea of least restrictive environment, we should have kids in their regular classroom with their non-disabled peers to the maximum extent that's appropriate for them. And they should only be removed from that setting after we've tried any support or service that might be appropriate first. And so when a child turns 14 in Iowa, we have to start planning for life after high school, for living, learning, and working. And so what is that life going to look like after high school, and how are we going to help that child to get from where they are right now to that end goal? And so an IEP should then contain extra goals and services that are specific to that transition planning process. And so starting in the age 14, you might start to see questions and goals around transition planning for your student. And we do have a website through Ask that focuses on transition planning. It's transitioniowa.org. There it is. You know, once we really get to high school, it's good to just start talking about what are the next 4 years going to look like? What kinds of skills do we really need to be focusing on so that we're ready for maybe that community college program or whatever whatever the next thing is going to be? What skills is that child going to need to be successful in that program? And so the last piece, I think this might be my last piece here, is that the IEP process comes with procedural safeguards. And so parents have rights in this process. And again, they should be providing things in writing to you if they're denying your requests. So if a parent has asked for something to be included in the IEP and the team says no, then you'd like your prior written notice of that decision, or you'd like that explanation in writing. And so it can make a big difference sometimes when they know that they're going to have to put that explanation in writing. You know, it makes a big difference. So to ask for your prior written notice of that decision, you know, lets the school know that you know what your rights are. And hopefully that will make a difference. And did I do it? Oh, there's also some conflict resolution options that are available. Hopefully you don't have to use them, but if you ever get to the point where you're feeling like, gosh, I'm really frustrated and this isn't working, I'm happy to explain what those options are. And hopefully we can work things out without having to go to those options, but you know, they're there if you need them, and we can help you to do that. So I think, parents are a huge piece of the special education law and really why the law is what it is. And so it's important for parents to advocate for their children. Nobody else is going to do it. And the way the law keeps changing really is dependent on parent advocacy. The IDEA law is supposed to be reauthorized sometime soon. It should have been reauthorized already. So you might want to pay attention to that. To try to have some input into that process if you're interested when it comes up for reauthorization. So I don't think I have any time for questions, but I will be in the next room if anybody wants to come by and ask. And I've got a newsletter sign up and things like that over there too. So thank you.
We'll go ahead and do our break and then until 3, and then for your agenda, I believe all of yours say breakout room 1 and breakout room 2. Breakout room 1 is right behind this wall. So it's Salon C. So if you just go outside these doors and just down this hallway, that's where room 1 will be, and this will be room 2 for the rest of the day. So this room will have, we'll have Missy Johnson in place of Tammy Crouch, and then we'll have the panel at the end of the day. So go ahead and take your break, and then we'll come back after that. We'll get started at 3. Oh, and please remember to fill out those